Hey guys, how you doing? This is about JFK, your alma mater, or soon to be alma mater, his domestic programs and his foreign policy. So let's get right to it. The president throughout the 1950s was Dwight D. Eisenhower, former general, and in his farewell address, he made a warning to the people, which something that we still haven't learned. But if you could see right where that underlying part was, the Council's government must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. So, the military industrial complex is the combination of the military, um, defense companies, and also kind of think tanks. And by them coming together, they would create more guns, more weapons. And by doing that, to make the most money as possible, they might urge you to get into military conflict. So this is a general saying, hey, be nervous about these guys because they might force us into a war. And these people, this group, the military industrial complex, still has a pretty powerful hold on the American government. Our military budget is outrageous still today. And some people might have said this is what pushed us into the Vietnam War, which will happen during the 1960s. So the guy who's going to take over for Dwight D. Eisenhower is JFK, John Francis Kennedy. He wasn't even the first candidate in his household. His older brother Joseph, they all thought he was going to be president, but during World War II, he got into a plane accident and died. So JFK kind of has to take over that role of becoming president. His father wanted his family to have a president. So he's born into a powerful family. His father, Joseph Kennedy, was a banker, had millions of dollars, you know, uh, manipulated the heck out of the stock market. And his mother's family were leading politicians in Boston. So a pretty powerful family, a Catholic family. He went to Harvard. He actually went to Princeton first, but ended up going to Harvard. He wasn't supposed to fight in World War II because he was too scrawny, but he joined the Navy and he was a PT boat commander in the Pacific. It got shot down and cut into half, and he actually hurt his back. But because he was such a strong swimmer, he actually saved one or two people and swam like half a mile to shore. So he won an award for that. He was a congressman for about 6 years at a really young age. He was a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts for about 7, 8 years. And he was a Pulitzer Prize winning author of a book called The Profiles of Courage, where he looked at congressmen and senators throughout history who took unpopular positions and, defended them uh, even though it was unpopular. What I just found out recently was that he didn't actually write it. Somebody else wrote it for him and he took credit for it. So I kind of lost a little respect for him, I'm not going to lie. This is him as a PT boat commander. He hurts his back severely in World War II, and it's going to hurt him for the rest of his life. He's going to be on pain pills for a long time. 1960 election. We have Kennedy, who's this young, wealthy, energetic Catholic. We never had a Catholic president before. He's going against Richard Nixon, who's a very experienced politician. He was the vice president under Eisenhower for 8 years. He was a congressman and senator from California. He was tough on the Cold War. He was part of HUAC. This guy's been around for a long time. This is one of the first times they had a televised debate between the candidates, and you have JFK, who's this pretty handsome looking guy, Hollywood type looks. He has makeup on during this, so he looks really good. Nixon, on the other hand, he has no makeup on. He is sweating profusely through the whole thing. He has a 5 o'clock shadow, means like his beard kind of starts popping out on television, and he just didn't look really comfortable. And some people thought that Kennedy, being this suave Hollywood type guy, won the debate because of his good looks. And what's ironic is if you polled people who listened to the debate on the radio, everybody thought Nixon had won, and everybody who watched it on television thought that JFK won. This was an extremely close election. JFK won by less than 120,000 votes. Here's them on the television screen. This is the close electoral election. 303 electoral votes to 219. And if you look at it again, 120,000 votes, pretty close. Camelot. This is the nickname of JFK and his family. He had a beautiful wife. Her name was Jackie Bouvier Kennedy. Came from a wealthy family in New York. She was a photographer. They had two young children. We hadn't had two young children in the White House since like Teddy Roosevelt. So this was, a lot different from Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was kind of old and, kind of a crotchety old guy. JFK is the youngest president ever elected. The youngest president ever to take office was Teddy Roosevelt, but he wasn't elected. He came in because William McKinley was assassinated. He brought this New England style, which was different from the president before that. He's rocking Ray-Bans. He's wearing chinos. He's rolling up his shirt. He's wearing these tight European cut suits instead of these like broad shoulder American suits that Dwight D. and Nixon were wearing. He had these movie star looks. He was a sickly man. Again, he had that major back injury. He was also suffering from Addison's, which I always forget. I think it's like the one of the glands or your kidneys. So he was on a lot of medication while he was president. And last but not least, he had a lot of affairs with women other than his wife. One of the most famous speculated one was Marilyn Monroe, who you learned about in the 1950s. But yes, a lot of women he cheated on his wife with. So this is Jackie Bouvier Kennedy. This is his daughter. This is Caroline. This is him rocking the rig bands out on his yacht in Massachusetts. And this is Marilyn Monroe meeting with JFK for his birthday celebration, where she's saying happy birthday to him. And this is actually his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, who apparently might have had an affair with Marilyn Monroe as well. This is JFK Jr., John, they called him. And this is Caroline. They're dancing in the Oval Office. So again, this young, energetic family. His wife Jackie was actually pregnant while he was president, and she lost a child early on, 1961, 1962. Ironically, he gets assassinated, and John dies in a plane accident. It's called the Kennedy curse. His brother Bobby, pictured there, he's going to get assassinated. He lost his sister to a airplane accident. Caroline is actually still alive. She was actually the ambassador to Japan under Barack Obama's presidency. One of the most famous inaugural speeches and lines of all time. You can watch that on your own. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. How are you going to make your country better? The New Frontier is the name of his domestic program. He surrounded himself with the best and the brightest. The one guy is Robert McNamara. He's from the Ford Motor Company. This guy was an accountant, he was a stat-driven man, so he always looked at stats. In the 1950s, he was trying to devise more fuel-efficient cars that wouldn't put as many pollutants in the air, and he also believed in safety. He's the first one to introduce seatbelts. He became Secretary of Defense. We have Dean Rusk, who's from the Rockefeller Foundation, a major think tank funded by John D. Rockefeller and all his philanthropy. He becomes his Secretary of State. We have Arthur Schlesinger, who was a historian, becomes his spokesperson and advisor, and this is the man that actually wrote that Pulitzer Prize winning book but never took credit for it. And RFK is going to be his Attorney General, which is the top lawyer that represents the Justice Department. And RFK I'll talk about in a second, but this guy was a bulldog, tough as nails, brilliant. If he ran for president in 1968, he probably would have won, but he got assassinated. The main goal was to improve the economy, education, healthcare, civil rights, and the space program, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper. Some things that he did to help this new frontier and help people out. He did increase the minimum wage the first time since probably the New Deal. He did extend Social Security benefits, so giving more money, not just to people 65 and older, but disabled people and this and that and whoever else. Improved the welfare system to help kind of buoy up some people on the bottom. He introduced the Peace Corps, which is a pretty awesome organization. You can do this in college or like right after college. The idea is young Americans, they go out to poverty-driven places and third world countries, and they just try to help out, building schools, helping out with fresh water, and it's trying to promote peace. Like, oh, look at these Americans, they can't be that bad, promoting peace throughout the world. He is going to actually introduce huge tax cuts. So it's actually kind of a Republican idea that he's going to take from the 1930s, not trickle down the economy where you slash taxes to like nothing, but he's going to have huge tax cuts to try to stimulate the economy because it was stagnant by the end of the 1950s. He's going to introduce the Equal Pay Act, which abolishes wage disparities based on sex. Now, we still have a wage issue between men and females today, but it just means that people are not executing this law well enough or using this law well enough. So it's on the books. People just don't really use it, especially from the Justice Department. Here you can see the marginal federal tax rate. This is the how high the taxes are on the wealthiest. All right, so right during World War I, it was really high. They're paying about 80%. So if you had $100,000, anything you make more than that, you're going to be taxed at 80%. So you get to keep 20 cents, 80 cents go to the government. Dropped down during the 1920s. That's that trickle down economy. During FDR, taxes go up. During World War II, taxes go really high. They go down a little bit in the 40s and 50s, and then they pretty much stay at the same rate until he drops taxes in 1963. All right, to a pretty low level. As you can see, taxes have gone down, yet Americans still complain about it. That's McNamara, Secretary of Defense. You're going to find out a lot more about him during the Vietnam War. He doesn't do that great of a job. That's RFK. He's the Attorney General. Again, a bulldog. He's going to fight for civil rights. He's going to push the envelope. Really smart, tough guy. American Democracy Outreach. We'll talk about the Bay of Pigs fiasco, where he was trying to bring democracy to Cuba. Peace Corps, as I mentioned before, American volunteers sent on missions of freedom, still successful today. The Alliance of Progress, he's trying to rebuild good neighbor policy in Latin America by providing economic assistance to places in South America and Central America, because during the 50s, we used a lot of spies and the CIA to overthrow any country that might seem communist because it's part of the containment policy, but pretty unsuccessful. We're still trying to use private enterprises to take control of these South American countries, and a lot of South American countries didn't trust the U.S. anymore. So these are places that the Peace Corps go to today that you can visit and, try to help produce a better image for peace and democracy, and using our best and brightest from America to achieve these goals. The space program. Oops, this video doesn't exist anymore. Sputnik, as you remember from the 1950s, kind of sent a shockwave to the United States that we were behind Russia and the USSR in the space program and technology. So he makes this bold predicament: by the end of the decade, we are going to land on the moon and return him safely to Earth. We spent $24 billion on NASA. In 1969, he wasn't alive to see it, but the Apollo 11 mission showed Neil Armstrong landing on the moon and saying that incredible quote. And you can obviously watch the video. I'm sorry, it's not working. Kenya's foreign policy, no, not so great. So first we have the Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs is named for this area below Cuba. What happened was Cuba, led by Fidel Castro, overthrew a guy named Batista and turned it into a communist country. We couldn't have a communist country being 90 miles away from the United States. So Eisenhower's administration planned an invasion using old Cuban citizens to go get trained by the CIA and attack this area. JFK, when he became president, decided to go with this attack plan. So these Cuban exiles were shipped to the Bay of Pigs. They were supposed to land there, fight against Fidel Castro's troops, and hopefully the Cuban people would rise up and help these Cuban exiles. The only problem was there must have been a leak. Maybe there was Russian spies or Cuban spies involved in CIA, because Fidel Castro was waiting for these Cuban exiles when they landed. They didn't have a chance to actually even land well enough. U.S. airplanes were supposed to fly there and give them air cover. They never did. So these people were trapped. And this was a huge embarrassment for the United States. And it made him look really bad in the eyes of the world. And he said this pretty famous quote, which I always like to say, that whenever there's a success, there are many fathers, but when there is a mistake, it's usually an orphan. So when good things happen, everybody wants to take credit for it, but when something bad happens, nobody wants to take credit for it. And he said, "This is my fault. I made a mistake," which was pretty noble of him. The one thing that he does get a lot of credit for in his foreign policy was the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, in 1962, our spy planes noticed that there were missile sites all over Cuba, and that they were getting nuclear weapons from the Soviets. And we obviously can't have that so close to the United States. By them having nuclear weapons, they would be able to attack most places in our country in about, as you can see, 12 minutes or less. All right, so it would take 15 minutes to send a nuclear bomb from Cuba to New York. We would not obviously be prepared for it, and this would be catastrophic. So Kennedy could not allow this to happen. So his solution with the Cuban Missile Crisis: in public, he sends a huge naval blockade. So he is going to send American ships right here to block any USSR ships from going to Cuba and bringing these missiles. So we'll see if Russia, the largest owner of nuclear weapons, is going to stand down, or if they're going to, send a nuclear bomb and start nuclear holocaust that we're all afraid of, massive retaliation. Behind the scenes, they make an agreement. The U.S. will remove missiles from Turkey and Italy that were directly in the backyard of USSR if the USSR decided to remove missiles from Cuba. They agreed to this. We were this close. This is the closest we ever got to a possible nuclear war. And Kennedy stood his ground against Khrushchev, who was the leader of USSR for a long time. And it showed his bravery and his courage in this situation. So it's 6 days. I think it was 13 days altogether. USSR backed off, but everybody in the United States was extremely nervous. Nikita Khrushchev removed the missiles. We had a period of détente. Détente is a fancy French word for the easing of strained relations. We actually got along with them for a while. And we put a hotline in. This is a direct phone line between the United States and Moscow. So, we both have nuclear weapons. Just to make sure that we're not doing anything silly, we can talk. The president can talk to the premier of Russia and make sure that we clear things up so we don't do anything foolish like press a button and send a nuclear weapon, which would send hundreds of nuclear weapons and destroy everything on Earth. So the result: US, Great Britain, USSR, and 36 countries signed the first nuclear test ban treaty. So you couldn't test nuclear bombs above ground. So now they start doing it underground because they didn't want the nuclear fallout landing, the dust falling all over the country and all over the world, excuse me, and possibly giving people cancer and other ill diseases and ill things. We did crash one more time with the USSR, and this was over Berlin. If you remember, Germany split into two pieces during the Cold War. So East Germany is communist USSR based, West Berlin and West Germany are democratic based, protected by the United States, France, and Great Britain. Now, Berlin is weird because Berlin's actually in East Germany and it's surrounded by East Germany. And it's kind of stuck in the middle. Do I have a picture of it? Let's see. No, I don't. Sorry. So Khrushchev decides to put a wall right there to split the two sides so they couldn't travel anymore because so many people were leaving East Berlin to go to West Berlin because they wanted democracy. So, 1961, Khrushchev wanted the U.S. to leave West Berlin altogether. Kennedy actually flies to West Berlin. He makes this famous speech where he says, "Ich bin ein Berliner," which translated in German is "I am a jelly donut." Not totally lying to you. A Berliner was a jelly donut, but they understood what he was saying. That I am a person of Berlin. I'm going to stand with you. We're not going to let Russia take you over. So Berlin Wall separated communist East Berlin from democratic West Berlin until like 1989, 1991, somewhere around there. There is a wall being constructed. So if you were living like right on this line and you had neighbors there, you wouldn't see them for another 40 years or 30 years. There's a line right there. There would be guards, barbed wire, and you couldn't get across. So the assassination. He's running for. He's going to be running for election soon, 1964, and he goes down to Dallas, Texas, a major state he needs to win. His VP, Lyndon B. Johnson, is from Texas, and a lot of Texans did not like him anymore, mainly because of civil rights laws that he was thinking about passing. So he is going around a corner. He's waving at the people. He has an open car, which was not too smart. He's waving, and he got shot twice. One shot him through the neck. You can see the video. I won't show the video, but you guys can watch it. It's called the Zapruder film. You can see him choking, and then uh, Jackie Kennedy is like patting, like, "Hey, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And the second one hits him in the skull, and pretty much is dead after that. Lyndon Baines Johnson is sworn in afterwards on an airplane. Many conspiracies, like who did this? Did Fidel Castro do this because of the Bay of Pigs fiasco? There's an instance that the mafia did it because his brother was attacking them and kind of going after him in court. Also, possibly he had an affair with one of the mafioso's girlfriends, this guy named Sam Giancano. Was it the CIA that did it because they didn't want him to bring down the military industrial complex and the strength of the CIA? So many different conspiracies. But so far, all we know is that Lee Harvey Oswald and the Warren Commission, who investigated, said that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only person and he was the lone assassin. And the Zapruder film is that this is him right before he gets assassinated. This is the governor of Texas. I can't think of his name right now off the top of his head. He actually gets shot in the wrist when the bullet goes through his neck. Again, you don't have to watch it, but this shows the assassination. This is actually Jackie Kennedy. It looks like she is running out of the car, but she is actually going to pick JFK's skull and try to put it back into his head. Again, I don't know how you would react if you just saw your loved one get shot. There's Lee Harvey Oswald on live television. He is going to be transferred from prison to court, and a guy named Jack Ruby comes up to him and shoots him and kills him. So we never could really question him and find out, was he the only person or was there other people involved? Was it many people involved? As LBJ, he is going to be elected, sworn in as president, and then he's going to win the 1964 election. He's going to do some pretty amazing domestic policy programs, but he is going to be the main architect of the Vietnam War, and he's going to get a lot of blame for that. That's Jackie O, still wearing the blood-stained outfit that she had while she was cradling JFK while he was dying in the limo. That's it. Sorry we went long, but a lot of stuff with JFK, home of the Mustangs. And oddly enough, JFK High School was supposed to be called Island High School, and then the assassination happened. They decided to dedicate it to John F. Kennedy. So that's why it's called John F. Kennedy Memorial High School. Thank you, and have a great evening, day,